Meeting to order. Thank you. And can we do a roll call, please?
Novato Fire District.
Here.
City of San Rafael.
Here.
Inverness Fire District.
Here.
Southern Marin Fire District.
Here.
Sleepy Hollow Fire District. Sleepy Hollow Fire District. Thank you. County of Marin.
Here.
City of Larkspur. And a quorum is present with 6 members.
Great, thank you. Anyone have any agenda adjustments? No, there's a lot on the agenda. Okay, we'll go ahead and open some time for public expression. Public is welcome to address the Finance Committee at this time on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to Government Code Section 54954.2, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments may be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. Please silence your cell phones during the meeting. Mute your microphone when not reporting out. Do you have any raised hands?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, moving right along. We have the consent calendar, and as far as I'm seeing, there's nothing on the consent calendar. Is that
Correct. I should have removed it, but
okay? I just wanted to double check. I'm not missing anything there, and then we will hand it over to Mark for an executive officer's report.
good afternoon, everybody. Happy rainy day. And just so you know, I did get word from Dan. His computer's being finicky right now, so he's trying his best to get logged in. So we should be seeing him soon. Live by technology, die by technology. So rain, at our executive committee meeting earlier this month, I was getting a little bit concerned because we had gone through a significant dry period and we were seeing the 100-hour and 1,000-hour fuel moistures get down back to near historical lows after all that rain that we got in October. And now we've had with this rain that we've received, we've had a good bounce back to what is average for those fuel moistures. That's the 1,000 and the 100-hour. And so again, those are the fuels that are about this big to about that big. But the fuels that are about this big are still at historic low levels. And it's going to take several years of rain for us to finally get past how low they are. So good news is that we've got some rain coming this week. I'm sure you guys have your flood things that you have to take care of at your own house. I know I've got my red flag duties at my house, and then I've got my flood warning duties at my house. So just before this meeting, I was out in the rain, making sure everything's working good. So, because apparently we're going to get quite a bit of rain later this afternoon. And Jason, I have a feeling, is double dipping between an OES meeting and this meeting that's talking about the rain that's coming up. Executive committee meeting, I thought went really well. And the key thing that we discussed during that's not being discussed in today's finance committee meeting is the recommendations coming from the strategic ad hoc subcommittee, and we'll be making a full presentation at the board of directors. And it comes with a staffing proposal, and we will be seeking direction from the board for staff to start creating the position descriptions, going through salary surveys, and creating the steps for a recruitment process. And we anticipate going to the full board in February to get permission to create those positions and then recruit for them. Prior to that entire packet being presented to the board, we would come back to you as the finance committee after we've done the salary surveys to look at that financial packet to make sure that it's been through this committee before it gets to the board of directors. We've also had many conversations with our member agencies regarding the staffing plan that's being proposed, but we're also presenting at the advisory technical committee tomorrow to receive their input on that, and then the operations committee meeting on Wednesday, again, to get their feedback. I had the opportunity to present the plan or the proposal to the Marin Managers Association right after our executive committee meeting, and we just received great feedback from the city managers that we have incorporated into at least how we propose and how we discuss this, and then how we can move forward. So very, very pleased with the feedback that we got both from the exec committee and the Marin Managers Association. And then I'll close out with, we have received one proposal for our evacuation risk assessment. It's not surprising that we only got one, because there really isn't a market for what we're asking. This is a first of its kind type packet or product that we're requesting. And if I could have handpicked I could not have handpicked a better team that's been formulated to respond to our proposal. But when with that level of talent also comes a price tag, and it is above our proposed budget. And so we are currently pursuing multiple grants. One of our grants is about 3/4 written. We will be submitting, let's see, in 9 days is the deadline for that submission. So we will be submitting that. We are partnering with Marin County Fire on that grant proposal, because it has to be a county agency that applies for that grant, and we don't qualify for that grant. So it'd be technically authored by or owned by Marin County Fire, but we're doing the writing, so Marin County Fire simply just can sign it. Then we will also be pursuing a coastal conservancy grant. And there is the deadline for that grant is in January, and they have a webinar coming up on Wednesday on what the aspects of that grant is and how we can apply. So MWPA staff members will be attending that webinar on Wednesday. We will still be going through the full vetting process that we had planned to go through, even though we only have one applicant. In fact, I think it's more important with only one applicant that we go through that process, because there's always concerns that when you put out an RFP and you only have one applicant, that you just rubber stamp that one applicant. Well, we're going through the full process. There will be a formal interview with our selection committee, and that is to make sure that they are meeting the requirements of the proposal, and that we are actually getting the value that they are proposing for that product. Then we will have a presentation from the team to the executive committee in our February meeting for the exec committee, and going to the full board in the February board meeting. And with that, I'll open to any questions.
Yep, Catherine. Oh, sorry, Catherine C or Catherine H. I don't know how to.
Which one?
For you, Catherine Hillard.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so since this is the finance committee, Mark, I need numbers with what you're talking about. So when you say that's above our criteria, what did we budget, and what is the cost of, what are they asking for? And part two, do we go out again? Do we do a broader search? Okay, those are my questions.
So number one, we had stowed away $1 million for that proposal, and from fiscal year 2020-21. And right now it's just, I just leave it at, it's more than double that is what the proposal is. And whether or not we go out again will depend on the interviews that we go through on January 11th is when we have the interview scheduled. And if we feel that we aren't getting the value for that, or they aren't meeting our requirements, then we can reissue the RFP. But quite frankly, I don't know how many more respondents we would get by reissuing.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mark? Mark, just to confirm, that's a core project, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Okay, so we will hear more about that in terms of also the cost and what they're coming up with.
Yeah, I'm not getting, I'm trying not to be specific with the cost, just because we still have some confidentiality issues while we go through the process to approve. And then we're also going to be asking them to sharpen their pencil a little bit at certain spots.
Okay, thank you. All right, can we open that up to if there's any questions from the public on the executive officer's report?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
All right, thank you. All right, so the next two, the two items under action items, they're about the policies. And that's one of the key areas for this group is really looking at how we move forward, but having some foundational policies in place. So we have the draft procurement and purchasing policy as well as the reserve policy. Both of these are very key documents. And so hand back to Mark and I think Jean to help present those.
Thank you very much. And yes, Jean's here to help us. Jean did much of the work and much of the research in the update to the procurement and purchasing policy. And just as background, we do have working draft policies that were approved a year ago, almost today. And we received quite a bit of feedback from the board when they were approved as working drafts, and they're approved as working drafts so that we can start to get to work. Some of the changes that were asked for were to make sure that we had, local vendor preferences, green vendor preferences, diversified ownership type preferences. Jean was tasked with researching standard practices and standard language, and Jean's the one that created the template obtained the template that we used. One important note is that the funding thresholds that are in that last summary table are the same thresholds that were approved a year ago. We didn't change any of those funding values, and they follow the guidelines of CUPCA, which is, I forget exactly what CUPCA stands for, but it's a California
California Uniform Public Construction Contract.
There you go. Thank you. And it really is geared towards public work agencies so that they can have for the type of project work that public works agencies do. And as we've mentioned so many times, MWPA is much more like a public works entity than it is a fire agency. So we felt aligning with CUPCA purchasing and spending thresholds made a lot of sense for us. One of the things I'm really looking forward to is the ability to create a vendor list for projects. And so we can go out for proposals for what rates vendors would charge us for, let's say, chipper days or for evacuation route clearing type projects, shaded fuel break type projects. And then as we approve work plans that need that type of work, instead of having to go out for an RFP for a vendor each time, we can go through our competitively bid list that we already have and go, okay, vendor A, do you want this job? No? Okay, we go to vendor B, so on and so forth. So that really will increase our efficiency. As a summary of changes, as mentioned in the staff report, we merged the purchasing policy with the credit card policy and disposition of surplus property, which we don't anticipate using much with the MWPA. We added a code of conduct and ethics, and then listed a really robust overview of purchasing authorities and responsibilities. And then more detail added for the procurement process, better definitions for informal bidding, formal bidding, requests for proposals, the two-step competitive bidding process or shortlisting, excuse me, which is that list that I talked about for vendors and how we can easily access them. Emergency procurement, exemptions from any competitive bidding or our ability to join cooperative bidding. And then lastly, we had the local green, diversified ownership, emergency preferences, and then a glossary of terms, and then a suggestion from Director McEntee, and that was a summary table of spending authorities. And with that, I'll pass it off to Jean on her work to get the standardized language and the standardized practices that are really what most government agencies are following.
Thank you, Mark. Mark gave you an excellent overview summary of the work that went into this policy. Clearly, one of the things that, excuse me, one of the things that came out of the staff meetings in August were that we really needed that vendor list and really clear purchasing policies, and in order to be efficient going forward. And so those were some of the key drivers. I'd like to thank in particular Elisa Schiffman and Mark, of course, Ann Krelock and Megan Azevedo for editing and monitoring and making sure that we're consistent with California law and consistent with our prior policies, and that we put together something that was both comprehensive and easy to follow. The last couple of thanks I'd like to offer are to the International City Managers Association. I went online and they have a discussion group, and I said, hey, does anybody have a current, recently updated procurement and purchasing policy? And got two excellent sources, one from actually a small city in Maryland called Tacoma Park. And they've done an excellent job in outlining their environmental issues in particular. And then the city of Gilroy in Santa Clara County had just recently completed a very comprehensive policy. And I use that as a template because, of course, that reflects California law. Some of the features in Maryland were not appropriate to California, but some were. And so those were the two bases of this document that's before you. Let me see if there's anything else here. If you are going to, well, once the board takes a look at this, if they decide to go ahead, then it should be adopted by resolution. And it does incorporate as much as we could possibly include from CUPCA and the previous policies that were built on the Southern Marin purchasing system. So there's also an interesting feature in there on the environmental side, the life cycle analysis. And that's designed to help us, you know, do what we can to make our purchasing policies and practices circular in nature so that we're not contributing more waste in the future. And it was Elisa who put together the summary of the financing, which was brilliant on her part and Sashi's part to help us give a chart that's really easy to figure out. So, and with that, I'd be happy to assist Mark with answering any questions you might have.
Thank you. Thank you to Jean and Alyssa. Questions? Tom?
Thank you so much, Jean and Mark. I want to commend you on the quality of this policy. It's fantastic. I've identified like a couple of dozen very minor non-substantive typos I'll send to you separately to correct. But if I could I just try to formulate a snapshot of the dollar levels and what those require? And I'm going to just wing this. I haven't prepared anything on it, but as I read it in section 3, there are, I'm sorry, Rachel, may I go ahead? I don't mean to command the floor here.
No, I think that'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just see if we could overview it really quickly and correct me if I'm wrong. Anything under 6,000 can be accomplished as long as it's budgeted without a competitive bidding process. If it's more than 6,000, then if it's a staff level decision, it's got to be in writing. Between 6,000 and 200,000 and above, those are the exclusive provinces of the executive officer or the board of directors. And the only way that they can avoid competitive bidding up to $200,000 is to seize upon an exemption. And those are listed in section 4.11. Those are the exemptions from competitive bidding. And here's where I'd like to say that I think we should try to maximize our use of the exemptions. We're a new agency. We want to be as nimble as possible. We've talked many times about how we want to try to minimize the red tape and maximize the speed of our implementation while being responsible at the same time. And so I've noticed that in the $60,000 to $200,000 range under section 4.6, we can engage in an informal process. We can seek out best value procurements that aren't based exclusively on price. So we can work with people that we know and trust. On top of that, section 4.8 has the request for proposal process, which is again a way to get around the complicated formal bidding process. It incorporates best value versus lowest price only. And here's where I jump ahead to the exemptions under section 4.11, items G and H, where we have anytime we have a specialized process or a grant funded process, we're eligible to skip the informal or the formal bid process, even if it's over $200,000. And so I'd just like to suggest that we get to that as frequently and as responsibly as we can, and minimize the number of competitive bidding processes that we have to utilize, and maximize the number of informal or exemption-based processes that we can use. There's only one that has struck me as a bit of a wrinkle here, and it's in section 3.7, items 2 and 3, where it says that the MWPA standard terms and conditions should always be utilized to replace a vendor's proposed contract. But if it's less than $10,000, it doesn't say whether or not we should defer to the vendor or insist on the use of our own. And I don't know how many sub $10,000 contracts we may be utilizing, but I'd hate to try to over lawyer those. If those can be decided at a executive officer level without a battle over whose form we're going to use, I'd encourage encourage us to do so. And I'm sorry for the whirlwind tour, but I really like the idea of staying as nimble as possible and maximizing the use of the less formal processes than the formal processes. And with that, thanks again, Jean. It's beautifully done.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you,
Just
Tom.
want to, so Mark or Jean, can you want to summarize what I'm not sure if we heard, I'm not sure if it's raining by you, but boy, it's just storming. Tom, I think what you really tried to do is summarize more than asking for changes.
Correct.
Is that, okay.
This is more of a policy suggestion than it is requesting changes. I don't have any changes other than the typos, and those are de minimis.
Yes. Okay, great. Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to tag on to, I think another great process to avoid the formal competitive process is the cooperative purchasing, and piggybacking on what has already been competitively bid. And there's tremendous opportunities for us to take advantage of that as well.
Great.
Which is contained in section 4.12.
Catherine Hiller.
Right. So what this looks like to me is, it is, if we are officially under KUCAC, what these mean is that in order to accomplish informal bidding, the KUCAC requirements are that you establish every November, you go out and put out a list to all contractors on specific types of jobs that you foresee. Now we're talking about public works. We're not talking about anything having to do with legal or environmental or any of the other administrative services, only construction, okay? But you are required to go out and create an informal bidding list every November. And we have been doing that at the fire district, and that is the list from which you pick people. So if they don't get on the bidders list, I would encourage people who know people that you trust to do that, because otherwise we're not following the KUCAC rules. The other thing is, so that basically these are the requirements for, again, construction versus administrative. And you know, there are penalties if we don't follow the right construction protocol. So, but the good news is that agencies that are not signed up under KUCAC have a much lower threshold for what they're allowed to do without competitive bidding. So this wasn't a big advantage. So I just wanted to explain that it's not that easy. You can't just pick and choose. You got to be aware. Again, it's different for administrative than it is for actual construction. That's all I wanted to add.
Thank you for that background. Can I just ask a clarifying question on that? Can you use somebody else's list, other agencies' list, or do you have to do your own?
You have to do your own. And the question I have about piggybacking is watch out. it's something that really is good for us. If we, let's say if Chief Weber goes, sees that he can get equipment or construction done for a certain price, and then we add on to that. We just have to make sure that we're doing it the proper way. Piggybacking is a gray area. So, okay,
Thank you.
that's it.
Great. Any other questions? Bruce?
Hi, yeah, some of this is relatively new to me. And so some of what Catherine just summarized about construction versus administrative, I'm not clear on, I understand that, we've set these limits up to $200,000 for the executive officer. Beyond that, the board, that's understandable. But what I'm hearing is that this does relate to CUFAC, and I do recall that we were going to align our purchasing policies with CUFAC many months ago, and you've done all that staff work, and I think this is fantastic. But where I get lost is this discussion of administrative matters, legal, staff. Is there a different set of thresholds that is not currently visible to me here?
What we did, Bruce, was just instead of having two sets of thresholds that staff would have to bounce back and forth between, are we on an administrative thresholds or are we on our construction thresholds? We just merged them into one set of thresholds to make it easier.
And so that then states that executive officer has $200,000 of purchasing authority without approval of the board.
But it has to be something that's been approved within our budget already. So it would have already have gone through an approval process with the board through the work. It would, such as a project that, let's pick an evacuation route clearing that ended up being $125,000. Well, that project's already been approved through the work plan, so it's already been approved by the board. The executive officer just has the ability to sign that contract without bringing it to the full board.
Okay, and I do recall us having that discussion that projects approved by the board, then all the hard work that gets done that none of the directors see, you are empowered to identify, who might be appropriate, the contract, the pricing, all that stuff. But so how does that relate then to staffing decisions or contract for environmental work or Mark, I'm a little. It's not clear to me that $200,000 figure is tied to projects specifically approved by the board or a budget approved by the board. It's not clear to me in that language, and so perhaps that could be clarified in the existing language. But so I have that's one, and then secondly the $200,000, and I'm asking this because just having gone through updating in Novato. Our chief's purchasing authority, we just raised him from 35,000 to 50. And we did that in alignment with looking at the county purchasing levels, the county itself. We looked at county fire, Jason's organization. And so we raised the chief's purchasing authority without board approval. So I'm still in question as to what about those administrative items that is there separate column for administrative items that is at different thresholds? That's my question.
No, we kept the same thresholds, like I said, just in order to make it easier on staff. Also, remember there's a cumulative process about it as well. If we are let's use Jean, since she's in this meeting, as an example, and we are updating her contract. If the total value of the subsequent contracts add up to more than 200,000, then it would have to go to the board for approval. No, Jean?
In your silence.
Yeah, no, the process is correct, but 200,000 is way out of my league. So
No, I'm just saying, gotcha. But if her cumulative contracts added up to greater than 200,000, then it would have to go to the full board.
right. Right, that's correct. And then keep in mind, Catherine knows probably more about this than anyone in the meeting about the public works requirements. But there aren't really a whole lot of public works requirements, construction projects tied to what MWPA seems to be doing. If those are going to occur, they're probably more part of the member agencies' work plans than they are MWPA's. And Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my recollection. So we accommodated the public works projects in case we needed them, but we're really not anticipating that MWPA is going to be the lead agency on major construction projects.
Actually, when we start developing our staff as per our staffing plan, and we start being the lead agency in getting the vendors, yes, we will very much be funding public works projects. So and the evacuation route clearings, the shaded fuel breaks, that type of work does qualify in the realm of public works agencies. So I see us actually exercising that quite a bit.
Okay, great, thanks. So Bruce, part of your question was, are you sensing that the document needs some clarification about where the admin work fits in?
Yes.
Two items of clarification. One is that these for items approved by the board and in a budget approved by the board. And so these are then contracting and procurement. But then secondly, I'm still a little lost about the administrative thresholds. And in theory, if I'm get this, that the executive officer could issue $199,999 contract without talking to anybody. And I'm concerned about that.
Thank you, Bruce. Catherine Hiller?
So I
This is
I
not-
wanna-
I just want to say that this is just as a board member, as a new board, as a new organization, and looking at what I understand as thresholds, we've empowered peers. This is much higher than peer agencies.
Thank you. Catherine?
So I agree with Bruce. I think we need to not lump it all together. I think we need to have, it's a very simple thing to give you, Mark, an authority level not to exceed, to take it to the board because, and I'm going to ask Elisa, I think our chief has $100,000 threshold before taking it to the board. Is that right, Elisa?
I actually think his is more like the 45.
So the thing is that we as a board are sharing the responsibility of such a large number with the executive officer so that he is not out there on his own legally liable for it. The board has authorized it. So I do think that we can't lump them together and would really appreciate just one or two more bars that says for administrative contracts, for example, what you can put the examples in: environmental, legal services, public affairs, contracts, or whatever, that we have a separate line and that it be lower. I'm sorry, Mark, but
No, that completely makes sense. And it would not be a massive edit to make. We can add a stipulation for administrative purchases. And like you said, include a couple of examples and $50,000 since the county is following that, other agencies are following that. The Nevada Fire has gone to that. $50,000 seems like a good threshold to me.
Good feedback. Thank you, Catherine. And Catherine. Catherine Donahue. You're on mute. Catherine Donahue, you're on mute.
Catherine, you are silent. You're muted.
I'm a new member of the Finance Committee and I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And Mark and I had some conversation about this earlier since I'm new. I read all of the documents and I'm happy to hear that a lot of them had been vetted and already kind of sub-approved and everything from the board earlier. From my experiences in the healthcare arena, the stipend, so to speak, or the expenditures seem to be a lot more than I was accustomed to, without other approval. Now, Mark was really good about talking to me that he would have the executive approval. But one example that I saw was the $600,000 for a staff member. And then he reiterated that he would, approve that
6,000.
subsequently, and it would be within the budget, which I understand and I get. But I completely think that I agree with the contracts and everything that has to go through all that vetting. But I also think that the administration and the construction should be separated, because it's a whole different ballgame. I mean, construction's one thing, administration's another thing, from what I experienced in the hospital environment. So that's just my opinion.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And just to confirm, that was 6,000, not 600,000.
6,000.
6,000. Thanks. All right. Tom, I know at one point you have another comment.
Yeah, are we talking about professional services here that are bundled with a construction contract? And we're trying to segregate the two so that we don't breach the $200,000 limit before we have to go out for a formal bid?
I think it's individual requests to separate those types of requests.
Okay.
And it's not connected with the bidding process. It's more connected to approvals to award the contract.
Got it. Okay. Because professional services are generally exempt from the competitive bidding process altogether. They're defined in section 3.2 of this policy, and it covers everybody from accountants to attorneys to artists, architects, landscape architects, construction managers, IT people, engineers, environmental consultants who we use quite frequently. All of that stuff belongs in its own distinct category.
And so what the conversation is, it's more about whether this executive officer can approve it solely, or would those have to go to the board? And that's where that $50,000 threshold would be built into that.
Well, as I read it, you have authority to go up to 200,000 with any of those people.
Right, and that's the concern, if that threshold is too high and not in line with most other government agencies.
Okay, I'm going to dissent from that. I think we ought to give you the authority you need to get things done as rapidly as possible, but I'll leave it there. Could I go, Rachel, very quickly back to something Jean mentioned, which was, Catherine Hilliard mentioned, if we were to coattail on a purchase by the county of Marin, for example, say Marin County Fire, piece of equipment or something like that. My question here, and this may only be answerable by legal counsel, is whose procurement policy prevails if ours is not identical to that of the county in that case? For instance, the county has its own procurement manual that has, as I read it, lower thresholds than ours. If we're coattailing on them and they have a low threshold, are we bound by that lower threshold, or do we get to proceed on the basis of our own thresholds? Now, this is a question of whose policy governs in the event of a joint purchase. I don't know that we can answer that today.
I think Alyssa might be able to provide some direction.
Economies.
I just want to provide a nuance, and this is kind of where we have some gray area at Southern Marin Fire at times, because we're trying to manage two things: the law, and I don't know if Catherine's calling it something different. Is it not called CUPCA anymore? So we have those thresholds, and then it's also the budgeting process is super important. So that's when the board weighs in on all the projects, and then it's just a matter of how much leeway does the executive officer get after you've approved all that.
Great. I think there is this balance between Tom's point of wanting to ensure that our policy allows decisions to be made so work can continue without having to always do this check, but at the same time be very aware of the amount the amounts and following the budget and the approval of those. So I think it's a matter of with the language and looking at that. It's sort of summarizing what I'm hearing from everybody. Is that fair?
And I can provide a partial answer to Tom's question. When it comes to approval thresholds, we would have to follow our approval thresholds in our procurement process based on what the value of the contract is, or the piece of equipment, or whatever it is.
Great.
Thank you.
Hi, Dan. Dan?
No, sorry to contradict you, Mark, but if you're making a purchase together, the most conservative agencies policies prevail, because you've got to follow whoever has the most conservative if you're doing it together. So to go to Tom's question, as I understood it, if the county is, I can guarantee if the county ever jointly bought something with somebody, they would impose their requirements if they're the most conservative. So
I wasn't referring to
we
a
would
joint
do the
purchase.
same. We would do the same.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. And one more question around this. As the policies, this policy as well as others get formalized, are we going to review those with the audit? Our auditors, are they looking for these policies or at these policies and providing feedback?
They are interested in internal controls. So I'm sure they'd be interested to a degree.
Okay. And have these policies, because I think we're in the process of being audited, the auditors right now.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
correct? Have they asked for these policies?
No, they haven't, but they did give me a questionnaire where I would mention these policies and tell them any safeguards we have.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you. Dan, did you have another follow-up question or comment? No. Okay, thank you. All right. I will open this up to public comment now. If there's any public comment.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thank you. So this is under an action item, I believe. And so do we feel comfortable with where it's at right now, or do we want this to come back?
If I could recommend that we move, since it sounds like the only point of contention is for administrative contracts, a 50,000 threshold, to have a motion that includes amending the language to build in an administrative cap of 50,000 so that we can move it to the board Thursday.
Is everyone comfortable with that, Bruce? I think you're speaking.
I concur with the just modify that the clarification that these limits pertain to items, pre-approved items by the board under an approved budget. And Jean, I think you were making some notes to that, but I would think we would want to make those two amendments and addition amendment and then move it on.
Yeah. To Bruce's point, if 3.3 in this document includes award authority, and we could add some clarifying language that indicates that these approvals are subject to budget authority granted by the board in advance of the executive officer taking action, for instance. And so I could provide some clarifying language in 3.3 for you to review in like a markup for that goes before the board, so it's easy to spot.
Great. Bruce, would you like any other questions on the recommendation for that motion? Bruce, you want to make that motion?
Yeah, I'd like a motion to approve, subject to clarification of administrative thresholds as discussed, and the clarification that the 3.3 limits pertain to items contained within a budget approved by the board.
Okay, and is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Tom. All in favor? Or do we need to do roll call? I don't even, for this one, do we do roll call or do we do?
Technically, we should do a roll call.
Okay, roll call, please.
Nevada Fire District,
Aye.
City of San Rafael,
Aye.
Inverness Fire District,
Aye.
Southern Marin Fire District,
Aye.
Sleepy Hollow Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin,
Aye.
City of Larkspur,
Aye.
and the motion passes.
Great, thank you. All righty, that was one down. Next one.
It'll get easier from here.
We'll see. All right, reserve policy. Who's gonna start this one off?
I'll kick it off and hand it off to Gene again. And again, a big thank you to Gene for tracking down the template that we used to create that. And Elisa will have a much more accurate number of our unspent from 2021 fiscal. But it's just under 9 million. And we are proposing that we use that unspent revenue to fund our reserve fund for the first time. And then consider the rest unrestricted reserves to serve as bridge funding between July and our December tax roll receipt. So we looked into what would be an appropriate percentage for an organization like ours for a reserve. And it seems that most government entities are between 15 and 25%. We landed on a 15% because much of our spending, quite frankly, is discretionary. They're based on projects approved by the work plan. It's not like we have roads that we have to maintain, or public works staff to continue to pay, or fire department or law enforcement to continue, or a non-discretionary funding. So if we have hit a significant economic downturn in our budget, which basically the only way that could happen is if we have a massive wildfire that destroys a bunch of homes, because we're based on square footage rather than property value, we can adjust how much work we're doing because it really is discretionary. So we felt that the 15%, which is just about 2 months worth of our overall revenue. And I mentioned the unrestricted reserves already. And then looking into it, we felt the Marin County Investment Pool, its track record, having 2 people in this meeting, or actually on the overview or oversight committee, or whatever they call it. So we felt it was a good, safe investment location with good returns, but also accessible for us. Gene, if you want to.
Once again, Mark, a very fine overview. And a reserve policy is always a good idea, just so you know that you've got the assets in place should anything unusual occur. And the 15% is a good starting point. And if for some reason this does not feel comfortable to you in the longer run, you can certainly adjust it later on. But it's it allows some, accounting for it. If you do need to borrow against it, for instance, you've got those factors identified. And of course, any transactions that occur from the reserve would be the board of directors' responsibility. So, and the executive officer will report periodically and in special occasions should it be necessary. So it's a good, straightforward reserve policy. And my suggestion is to take Mark's direction and approve it. And of course, if any changes need to occur, you've always got that capability.
And if I did forget to mention one thing, the 3 million that's listed in the policy itself is just what the initial funding will be. And it would not necessarily dictate what the annual funding would be. It would be stuck. We would be looking at the 15% of our general fund budget. And so we would calculate that each year. So as our budget increases, then that 15% value would be what's calculated each year. But then there's a recommendation to evaluate if that 15% threshold is the right number.
And most agencies incorporate that into their budget approvals too. If there's any resetting of your reserve amounts, then that's identified in your annual budget review.
Great, thank you. All right, questions. Tom, because you had your real hand up, and then Kathy.
Thank you. So Chief, just to be clear, the initial reserve we're establishing is 100% undesignated, correct? It's a general reserve, and that we aren't designating any subcategory for specific functions or needs.
Correct.
Excellent. Thank you.
Catherine?
So I'm just going to page 54, section 4, shortfalls. I just need a little explanation. I think it's a very good policy, but what it's in a sense says is when money is tight and we haven't been able to target our reserves for 2 consecutive years, we have to shrink our budget in order to come up with a surplus that will fill up the reserve again. Can you explain that a little better, Elisa, or someone?
So section 4.1 shortfalls, it would mean if we can't maintain that, then we would look at if that 15% is what we really need to follow, or do we look to make budget cuts elsewhere in order to get to the 15%? It gives the latitude for either or.
Oh, thanks. Okay.
Okay.
Or we could lower the percentage if we had to doing our annual review, if times were especially austere.
Thanks.
Correct. Any other questions? Reserve. All right. Can I open it up to public comment, please?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Great. Okay. No other questions from the board? No. All right. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority Reserve Fund Policy, November 24th, 2021.
Thank you. Is there a
I'll
second?
second. I'll second.
Second by Tom. Roll call,
Nevada-
please.
Nevada Fire District,
Aye.
City of San Rafael,
Aye.
Inverness Fire District,
Catherine, you're on mute.
Aye.
Southern Marin Fire District,
Aye.
Sleepy Hollow Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin. City of Larkspur.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great, thank you. All righty. All right, moving on. Mid-year budget status. Imagine Melissa has this?
Yeah, I will kick it off.
Thank you.
Hopefully this doesn't come as a surprise to anybody, but when we did the budget, when the board approved the budget in May, last year's actual data had not been finalized. And so we didn't put in all the funds that we could have that were unspent from the prior year. That makes sense. So last year, our net income was 1.5 million more than we had budgeted. So 1.5 million that was budgeted was not spent. And so what we're proposing here is that 972,000 of that, we would like to put it in the budget under environmental compliance and the evacuation study. And then we'll counter that if you look on the proposed on page 59. We're countering that with a new revenue line that essentially it's just there to say our budget is balanced. And so then the net excess or deficiency at the bottom is still 104,000 because we're using prior year funds. That makes sense. Anyone have any questions?
No, we're good.
Great.
Tom?
Could I ask Chief, or maybe Dan knows the answer? As a joint powers authority, are we subject to the GAN limit?
Actually, we researched that. I think it was
question.
September of last year, and we are not.
Great.
Good question. All right, Jason, did I see your hand up?
Yeah, just on the, for clarification purposes, on the funds that were left from last year, were those core funds? I'm making the assumption.
Core funds, Jason.
And that was, how did we end up with that much overage? Was that the $1 million set aside we had for the evacuation study, and the other $500,000 was just spent less than budgeted in the admin core area?
It was actually, I don't think it was in the environmental compliance and the evacuation study.
Okay, so there would have been no net difference to the member agencies for work. actual work performance on core stuff. So these were already set aside. Okay, that's what I want to clarify. Perfect. Thank you.
So I have a question, and it is a budget question, and this is for Mark. Going back to the EVAC study, which you mentioned earlier in the executive officer's report, and now we are looking at the budget. You had mentioned that you're going to be doing some work that number one, it is the A team, which I think is fantastic. That's what we need, and the work that they're doing is proven. The state of the art work that they'll be able to do. We're just putting together a whole different combination of questions for them to answer. But so that it came in well over our budget, which we really did not have a great idea what it would cost. And so we've now found that getting the A team costs a lot of money. You mentioned that we are pursuing some grants, which I think is fantastic. I am concerned. So here, and now we're talking about the reserve. And you're going to go back to the contractors and maybe whittle some stuff down, whatever you can do. But what's not been mentioned, and that is within the purview of this committee and the board, is to modify the budget and move money around if need be to expedite this project. And so my comment is I'm concerned that we don't move this along quickly enough. And my question isn't there an opportunity, Mark, for you and Anne and in all your research to come to the conclusion that you just need to come to the board and ask for some more money to get this project done?
Yes, absolutely, we could do that. However, the way the spending structure is outlined in the proposal that we received, it's over 3 fiscal years that we would be paying towards the contractor with benchmarks that they have to meet in order to receive funding. So we have enough to get us through. If we award the contract, we have enough to get us through this fiscal year, and then we can add to it during the budget prep for the next fiscal year.
Oh, okay. I think I understand. Thank Mark. I didn't realize it was 3 fiscal year project. And I do think that it's an urgent need to do the assessment, to identify evacuation pinch points and to identify hazardous situations along evacuation routes and to come up with some recommendations, and so that in the core projects we get the work done. So I guess, Mark, this is just really an invitation to please come to us, and whatever we can do to facilitate. That's what I'm asking, Mark, is for you to please come to us and make sure that we can get this done as quickly and as efficiently and effectively as possible. Let's not dawdle or toddle or whatever John Sebastian says in his lyrics.
Thank you, Bruce.
And message received.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say message received, and I would anticipate if we were going to do that type of request, it would be through the 22-23 fiscal year budget creation process.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. I just wasn't really quite aware of all that.
Great, thank you. I do have a question on the environmental compliance monitoring line. So we're using that sort of as a placeholder, it looks like, from the budget. Is that right? Or is that representing the fact that the environmental costs, when we did the initial evaluation, anticipating that the environmental costs for projects would come in at, what was it, 10%? And that we're seeing, is it 10 or was it 20? I don't remember, 10, I think. And that they're coming in higher.
So we are still building into projects the environmental compliance costs within the project budgets. That 150,000 that we're rolling from last year to this year is for environmental work that we're asking Panorama to do outside of projects, such as creating our handbook for and our standard practices for us to follow. So work that doesn't fall within a specific project.
Okay, great, thank you. So as we go forward in terms of budgeting the projects, when we break out the environmental, are you thinking that we will need to look at a higher percentage based on what we're already seeing?
That's what we're evaluating now. And as we create the platform to create next year's work plan, we are working whether or not to lump all environmental costs into one bucket that comes from the operations from the core projects, or continue to build it into each proposal. The 10% is working out well for projects outside of the coastal zone. It's not working as being accurate for projects within the coastal zone because the requirements are much more stringent and requires much more on the ground work from biologists and other people to do surveys, so that those costs are getting much higher than the 10%. So between Ann, Panorama, and myself, we're strategizing how to best approach that.
Great. All right. Any other questions related to the budget and the proposed adjustments? Alyssa, do you anticipate that we would, if we're doing adjustments, we would only be doing them once a year? Like really, if an adjustment has to come through, we'd see it once a year?
I
So
prefer
this-
just as little as possible. Yep.
Okay.
I
And
waited
what
a
would-
little on this one so that I could, just to make sure none others came up.
Okay. And how significant would you want, before you came back for a budget adjustment, how significant would we want to see?
Well, what I might do is we could say, hey, we're going to go over on this line. Does the board want to make an adjustment, or do we just want to say it's over budget and this is why?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Does the finance committee feel okay with that approach? Okay. And going forward, then you would be putting in a reserve line. Is that correct?
Yes, and I'll ask the county if I can create a whole new fund with them, and if not, I'll just make a sub account within the one we already have, and so then it'll be called out for the board to see every month.
With this budget adjustment, I guess we can't do it now to see the reserve in there.
It doesn't require a budget adjustment to have the reserve in there. Once the board approves the reserve policy, I'll just transfer the money.
Okay. Okay, great. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Can we open up to public comment, please?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Great, thank you. All right. If there's no other questions, is there a motion to approve the budget adjustment for FY22?
Motion to approve budget adjustment as presented in item C.
Okay, is there a second? You're on mute, Tom. Gotta hear you.
Sorry about that. I second.
Thank you. All right, roll call, please.
Novato Fire District,
Aye.
City of San Rafael,
Aye.
Inverness Fire District,
Aye.
Southern Marin Fire District,
Aye.
Sleepy Hollow Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin,
Aye.
City of Larkspur.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Great, thank you. All righty. Moving on, committee reports. I see we have Lucy from the COC. Lucy, do you have a report for us from the COC, or does anyone who's representing? Is Lucy being transported? Or
Hello, everybody. Afternoon, Finance Committee members. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give our first report as the Citizens Oversight Committee. And really, the report is just to say that we welcome this opportunity to ask questions when we need to. We don't see that as being a very frequent occurrence. And we think that it'll be helpful to different cycles of the year as more and more sort of nitty-gritty issues get discussed, and so that we have a proper understanding of what's going on. So we are in the process of redefining our policies and procedures so that we have certain guardrails on how we conduct ourselves and who we approach and what we discuss. And that will be, we're hoping, discussed, if not approved, at our next meeting this week. So thank you, and we hope to move forward productively.
Thank you very much, Lucy. It's nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
All righty. Any other committee reports? Anyone? No? Okay. Information items. Those are just listed. Mark, did you want to speak to any of these?
Yeah, I would like to talk about the expenditure of MWPA funds on public lands if you would like me to, or allow
Yes,
me.
please.
Thank you. So one of the questions that has come up as we've worked through different work plans or different projects and work plans is it appropriate to expend MWPA funds on public lands? And so we did an exhaustive research, and actually there's the other side of that question. Can we expend MWPA or Measure C funds on private lands? So there's two sides of that question. And so the research that we did was to go into our joint powers agreement, go into the language of Measure C. We also discussed it extensively, and I thank you for your time, Jason, with Jason Weber and with Stephen Robb from County Council, because they were two of the main architects through this. And the big question was it your vision that we would be able to expend funds on public lands? And it was a resounding yes, because wildfire knows no jurisdictional boundaries, and there would be a huge hole in our strategy if we could not perform projects on public lands. However, there is a big stipulation that the public landowners need to be partners with us on these projects, rather than relying simply on MWPA funding for those projects. And so far, we have had great partnership with our land management agencies. I'll use Marin County Parks and Open Space as an example. There were some proposed projects, specifically in San Rafael, Rachel, that San Rafael Fire proposed, and Parks and Open Space came back to us and said, you know what, that's already on our slate, on our docket of work for this year. So you will not need to fund that. We are already doing that. Then there's in-kind partnerships that, and again, I'll use Parks and Open Space. They have been doing much of the work for environmental compliance. And so that's decreasing the funding that we have to put towards our own environmental compliance. And then we don't have it available yet, but staff is working on a spreadsheet of what the land management agencies are currently spending for wildfire prevention within their lands. We're condensing that into a $1 per acre value. So we will know what the starting point is, and then it'll allow us to make sure that they continue to use their funding and not just lean on Measure C funding. But I think the staff report spells out pretty well where we hit what items of the JPA and the ordinance language that we leaned on hard to say that yes, that we can spend monies on public lands. And that was the definition of our member agencies. And it talks about we can expend within their jurisdictional authority. And I typically use CSA 31, which is Marin County Fire's jurisdiction, as the example. When you look at CSA 31 on the Marin map, you see that it overlays in almost the entire water district. So that public land is within our member agencies' jurisdiction. If you look at much of the GGNRA is within County Fire, or it's within Bolinas Fire Protection District's jurisdiction. So all the public lands fall within one of our member agencies, obviously minus Tiburon and Belvedere. So we could not expend any funds within Tiburon and Belvedere. But we feel that we're on very solid ground with that research, and also with that partnership with our land management agencies to make sure that they're not only, that they don't overly rely on Measure C funds, that they actually come to the table with funding. And with that, I'm open to questions.
All right, thank you, Mark. Any questions from the public lands item or any of the other items under informational? Tom, unmute, please.
Tom, you're muted.
Sorry about that. I have an announcement when the time is right. If this is the right time, I'll go ahead. If not, I'll wait.
Don't know what the announcement is.
No, it's nothing big. Just that tomorrow, Fire Safe Marin and the Sleepy Hollow Fire Protection District are jointly hosting a premiere of the next episode of Wildfire Watch TV. It's entitled "The Cost of Wildfire." And the special guest host will be Novato Fire Chief Bill Tyler. The episode covers the loss and the lessons from the campfire in Paradise. We'll hear from people who've lost their homes in their town, and we'll have an interview with Assemblyman Mark Levine. And then following the presentation, which will be about 30 minutes, we'll be jointly hosting a holiday party. This will take place at the new Sleepy Hollow Community Center, or newly remodeled Sleepy Hollow Community Center. Everybody's invited. If you're interested and haven't yet received an invitation, shoot me an email and I'll send you the invitation so you can RSVP. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you for that update. All right. Any other questions? Bruce, did you have a question?
Just real quick. Mark, thank you for a fantastic package on this expenditure question. I know that it's been months long with questions both from the public and internally. So my question is, what are the next steps with this? We're just going to lay this down as a cornerstone and stand it up? Are we the last committee to see it? What's next with this?
What's next is this is part of the board packet for Thursday.
Okay.
And I like the way you put it. This is the cornerstone for staff to follow in the future as we work with our public land management agencies to make sure that they're coming to the table with something to contribute.
Yeah, thanks. This will just make a lot of people more comfortable with the work that we've been doing and the integrity of the partnership, and fire knows no boundaries. So thank you, Mark, for a fantastic job, and whoever, and Ann and legal and all. Thank you so much.
Great. All righty. Moving on to the next item. Committee member requests any future agenda items?
I'm not a committee member, but I do anticipate receiving our, we brought it up, our audit. I'd hope to be able to get the audit by now and include it in this meeting. We don't have it yet. So when we do receive the audit, I would like the first step of that audit to be through the finance committee. So I would anticipate that coming to the finance committee. And then, as I mentioned, as we work on the, if the board approves our creation of the position descriptions and the salary survey, then that would be a future agenda item as well.
Great, thank you. I'd also like to ask if we could, I don't know what the right timing is, whether it's February or March or whenever, what is the budget process for next year?
And we would be starting that March, April, around there.
Okay. So maybe just in terms of outlining what the process is going to be, maybe that would be a good February.
Yeah, absolutely.
Item. And then another question, which I'm not sure if it's a finance committee item or a general one, Measure A. How does that fit into our picture at all? And so I know we can't discuss it here. It's on an agendized item, but it's definitely something that I think we'll have questions on.
And it completely lines up with the information item we just discussed.
Great. All right. Any other questions or items?
One other item then, and that Lucy is here. Thank you, Lucy. Mark, and maybe this just will be informational item for the full board, but I'm not clear on the work that the COC is currently doing as it pertains to our fiscal work. And I'm not sure whether it would be at this, where it's report here, report to the executive committee, or report to the board. But I just would like to get at the appropriate endpoint an update on what the COC is currently planning, what their plan of work is, what their projects are, and what their timeline and deliverables are.
And I think Lucy will agree with me. I think this committee is the perfect spot for the COC to present that process or that update too.
Absolutely, yes.
Great, thank you, Lucy. Good question, Bruce. All right, anything else? All righty, thank you all. Catherine Donahue, welcome to the committee. Good to see you. And I think we can go ahead and adjourn.
It's a pleasure to be here. I was muted.
No problem. Good. I'm glad. All right, we'll adjourn at 2:16. Thank you all.
Thanks.
All right, everybody, stay dry as much as you can.
Have a good end of the year.
Bye-bye.
Bye.